What's up, everybody? Welcome in. Days, what is it, 6 and 7, 5 and 6? I don't even know what days we're on for Hannah Gutierrez's trial, but it's always interesting in a trial when you hear the same couple names over and over again, and then the jury finally hears a lawyer say, the state calls, and then insert that witness's name. And in this trial, the two names we've been hearing the most have been, I should say, the three names we've been hearing the most have been Alec Baldwin, number one, outside of Miss Gutierrez, Sarah Zachary, and David Halls. So Alec Baldwin's not going to be called during this trial because he would remain silent. But we finally hear from David Halls and Lauren Zachary, and then also Joel Souza, who is the director who was also shot and one of the victims in this case. So we hear from these witnesses that we've been waiting on and hearing so much about and hearing where they were standing, what they touched, what they did, what they didn't do. But to hear it from their own mouth is always incredibly important. And so I think the jury will be locked in on this testimony and we'll see what it actually proves. Because while they are witnesses for the state, there's no doubt that there was some good information that came out for the defense during all of these witnesses. So hit that like button if you guys haven't already as we're getting this video started, and make sure you're subscribed to our channel. So, before we got to David Halls, there was another grip. He said he saw the cart with firearms and ammo on it. He saw the actual shooting happened, tended to Elena. He said Sarah Zachary brought the firearm into the church. That's what he thought because someone told him that, but he wasn't sure. He didn't actually see it. Okay. That was that witness. Now, David Halls. Okay. We all know him. He's the AD from Russ, and he pled guilty to a misdemeanor. I may have said he pled guilty to a felony in another video. He pled guilty to a misdemeanor, 6 months unsupervised probation, which came out during his testimony. He was responsible for the safety and thought it was safe up until October 21st, the day of the shooting. He did not have concerns about Hannah as an armorer. When there was a firearm on set, he would make an announcement. He did help Hannah load the guns or have her load them in front of him. He named everyone that was in the church that day of the shooting. And he's the one that called Baldwin to the set. Okay, so that kind of sets the stage to bring us up to what happened when the actual shooting occurred. And a lot of good stuff, again, came out for the defense from David Halls' is testimony that it was a safe set. Hannah Gutierrez didn't do a bad job. Maybe this was just one mistake. And why that testimony is so important is if this was just one mistake and the defense can prove, because I think their best argument is becoming now at this point. I've tried to pick out what their best arguments are each day. And their best argument that's coming through right now is she was not in the church. And if she is not there, David Halls is responsible. So if she is not responsible, meaning Hannah Gutierrez, then she does not have that duty. And if she doesn't have a duty, she can't be negligent. And that's the theory they try to develop over the last couple of days, including with David Halls, even though his testimony is Hannah Gutierrez gave Alec Baldwin the firearm. So let's listen to our first clip here of David Halls' testimony. And we're going to listen to quite a bit of it today as we go through he and Sarah Zachary and Joel Souza's testimony.
Tell us about when Mr. Baldwin appears in the church and then Ms. Gutierrez, and walk us through what happens.
Mr. Baldwin entered the church. He took his position where he was needed in the pew of the church. I'm standing in front of Mr. Baldwin, facing Mr. Baldwin. It was no more than 5 feet from him. I was a body width to what would be his left. And Ms. Gutierrez appeared on my left-hand side with the revolver, and she said, let's do the gun check. She opened up the latch to show the drum of the revolver. She rotated the cylinder. It was empty. Checked the barrel. It was what is referred to as a cold gun. And Ms. Gutierrez just took a few steps and gave the gun to Mr. Baldwin.
So this was before it was loaded. So last he saw it, she spun the cylinder, showed him no ammunition in this firearm, and then handed it to Baldwin. Before the shooting, obviously, because we know there was ammunition at that point.
Now, It's your recollection at that point in time that the gun was empty. It did not have dummies in it.
Absolutely, it was empty.
Okay. And you looked at it, correct?
I looked at it, yes.
Now, let me stop for a moment. Were there any opportunity, at any point in time during that day, did you sit in for Mr. Baldwin?
I did.
When was that?
He just talks about how he sits in for him sometimes when
Because of COVID.
they need
I wanted
the
to
extra time or he's not there.
And it was
A firearm? Just so that they could set up the shot?
Yeah.
Okay. So
By the way, he
after-
said he was retired now. I think he meant he was retired because of this or retired by this. Probably tough for this guy to get a job in the industry, I would guess.
the setting up of the shot, after you sitting in for Mr. Baldwin, just to be clear, it's your recollection that Mr. Baldwin came in and Ms. Gutierrez came in around the same time?
yes.
Okay. She does the gun check with you. You see an empty gun. To your recollection, Ms. Gutierrez hands the gun to Mr. Baldwin. Is that right?
That's correct.
What happens after that? How do we end up with a gun that is no longer empty?
I did not see the gun taken away from Mr. Baldwin. I'm still in the same position, facing him, body width to his left, no more than 5 feet in front of him. You know, as an assistant director, you're looking around, you're observing, you're communicating with people. I did not see Ms. Gutierrez take the gun from Mr. Baldwin, but she appeared back on my left-hand side and she said that she had put dummy rounds into the revolver.
So he didn't
And it-
see her. So he saw the whole transition when Baldwin got the firearm, that it was empty. But then he didn't see her ever take it back. And all of a sudden he knows now there's dummy rounds in it. And Gutierrez has it with the dummy rounds in it.
That point in time was another safety check then.
She opened up the latch to the revolver. I recall seeing 3 to 4 what I believe to be dummy rounds. I had seen the dummy rounds before
And when you say you saw them before, are you talking about that day or?
that day.
Okay. And let me ask you, under what circumstances would you have seen the dummy rounds if the only other time that guns were dummied up was a rifle?
Yes, and I believe on that day, I did see those dummy rounds on her cart.
Okay. So you were familiar with what they looked like.
They had a very distinctive bright brass end to it. What would be the end of the bottom of the shell casing, and all the primers were depressed, meaning that this has already been a bullet that has been fired. And
But sir, let me ask you, you indicated that you only saw 3 or 4. You didn't see 6.
I don't recall her fully rotating the cylinder.
Okay.
So he says she didn't spin the cylinder. Now, you can say that's pointing the finger at Hannah Gutierrez, but it's also pointing the finger at himself because he's supposed to make sure she does. That's the whole point of that safety check. But he can turn around and say, yeah. And he does say, I was wrong. I was negligent. I pled guilty for it. I admitted what I did was wrong. And that is pretty damning when they look over there and they say, if this guy admitted he was wrong, why can't she admit she was wrong? And we'll talk about how they dealt with that on cross.
You don't recall her fully rotating it.
I do not.
Okay. And even though the cylinder wasn't fully rotated, did you let that safety check sort of pass?
I did.
Okay. And what's your recollection about what happened to the gun after that?
She took a few steps to Mr. Baldwin and gave Ms. Baldwin the gun.
Okay.
And then she gave Mr. Baldwin the gun. It's really interesting. I didn't even know he was going to testify to this. Some people may have if they've seen other interviews of him, but everybody else has basically testified that Dave Halls gave Baldwin the gun. He says Hannah Gutierrez did. So I think the jury at this point is probably going to believe that Dave Halls did, since that's what everybody else said. So how much do they discount the rest of his testimony? How would you deal with that as a potential juror? Anybody watching, just let me know in the comments. How would you deal with that? All of the testimony is consistent from the state's witnesses, and then the state calls a witness that says something different, that Hannah Gutierrez handed the firearm. Would you discount all of it, or do you just think he's trying to cover his butt there? Because to me, that kind of muddies the waters for his entire testimony, that he says something different than everybody else says. Even Alec Baldwin, but Alec Baldwin has told multiple versions of the story.
And let me ask you, sir, were you criminally charged in this case?
I was.
And did you enter a no contest plea to negligent use of a firearm?
I did.
And why did you do that? When I say why, what in your mind caused you to be, what caused a plea to negligent use of a firearm to be appropriate? What did you do?
It's again tough to ask this question, but the jury's going to want to know the answer, and the defense is going to bring it up. And I think it's good evidence for the state that we have a guy on here working hand in hand. One of them, they were holding the gun, passing the gun, whatever, between him and Hannah, and he's already pled no contest. But to the jury, they probably don't differentiate between no contest and a guilty plea. And now we're here for Hannah, so obviously she's guilty if this guy's guilty, right? That's what the state wants the jury to think.
That that would justify that?
I was negligent in checking the gun properly.
Okay, that's the reason that you took that plea. Is that right?
That's correct.
So, to the best of your recollection, Ms. Gutierrez hands the gun to Mr. Baldwin. Walk us through what happens after that.
The revolver is placed. Mr. Baldwin had a holster. That the gun was basically at his chest, and his action was to take the gun out and point it at what had been the two U.S. Marshals. And he was pulling it out. I'm sure he was getting used to that action. He was in communication with Ms. Hutchins about where to point the gun.
Do you recall, sir, was Mr. Souza also in the room?
He was.
Was Mr. Souza also participating in how to set up this shot? Do you recall?
No, I just recall that it was communication between Mr. Baldwin and Helena.
Okay. And then what happened?
The gun went off.
When the gun went off, what did you think happened?
There's so many thoughts. Honestly, the idea that it was a live round of ammunition that went off was just.
So he continues to kind of explain what happened. But I want to jump a couple minutes ahead because the most important part for the trial is what happened after, right? Because we've had a lot more testimony with the witnesses over the last day or two about right after the shooting. What happened? Where did the ammo go? Where did the firearm go? Who was touching it? Who was checking it? Who was potentially manipulating possible evidence? Because that's been thrown out there a little bit in this trial.
Keep space.
Do you know where the gun was in these moments after it went off? Was it, if you recall, was it left in the church? Was it taken out?
I had an assumption where the gun was. What was going through my mind, trying to determine what had happened. Again, the idea of what was in the gun that would do this to two people. Still, no ability to compute that a live round of ammunition would have been in that gun. And I said, in an effort to triage the situation, I need to know what's in that gun. I went back into the church. I went to the pew. On the pew was the revolver.
Honestly, okay, I know this guy's probably not my favorite witness, and I do realize it's hard to take anything that he says seriously or honestly after, some of the statements he made, but I kind of agree with him. And I think I might do the same thing if something like this happened. I might go and just dissect the gun to figure out what the heck happened. So I don't necessarily know. Maybe he was trying to cover something up, but I believe they want to figure out how is this possible? How did this happen? And not just say, oh, don't touch anything. Let's wait for the police.
I grabbed the revolver. I left the church. I went to Miss Gutierrez's cart, which is on, if you're facing the church, it would be on the left-hand side of the church, right, just immediately around the corner. I took it to her and I said, I need you to unload that gun. I need to know what it's in it.
And did she unload the gun in front of you?
She did.
And what was taken out of the gun?
I recall seeing 5 dummy rounds, again, with the distinctive bright brass ends to them, and 1 shell casing that did not have a projectile on it, and it had a completely distinctive looking end to it.
When you say a distinctive looking end to it, what are you referring to?
I recall it as being gray, metallic gray. And I recall that it was just completely different looking. It's hard to explain. There was some kind of machining or something. Maybe it was raised. This is my recollection, but a more contemporary looking bullet than what I was seeing in the other rounds.
So obviously there's something different there. And John asked, how can you determine what round is loaded by just looking at the brass? I think you'd have to look at the stamp on the brass of every single round. Glancing doesn't cut it. Well, we've heard so much testimony of how you determine whether it's live or a dummy. You shake it, you look at the hole in it, whatever it may be. Some of them don't shake. You have to do other things, but just looking at them or even looking at half of them is never going to be something that people say is enough. And why it works for him, but not Hannah, is he is admitting he negligently checked the firearm. So it's okay for him to say this at this point, and that's why it's pretty important that he is then saying somehow this newer age, different looking ammo got on set. Again, we know that most of it came from PDQ or this Billy Ray individual, but we know Hannah Gutierrez herself brought some on set.
And let me ask you, sir, do you own guns?
I do not.
Do you shoot guns?
No, I do not.
So they've asked that to a lot of witnesses. I think to want to show like these aren't gun people, in case anybody on the jury is not, and just potentially trying to make sure that it's not just like, oh, this is gun country and everybody's just loose with guns. And he's like, no, that's not it. He was just negligent in checking it. Now, he confirmed near the end of his testimony that he never realized that she didn't stay in the church. He never instructed her to put dummies in the gun. And he doesn't have to testify for his sentence. It's just important to him that the truth be known, and her family, meaning Miss Hutchins, knows what happened. So this never happens again. So that's why he said he's coming to testify. And that's the way he points the finger at Hannah Gutierrez. She was doing stuff. He didn't know why or when she was doing it. And he still says, and this is the kind of part where I think the state loses the punch with him, is he says Hannah handed Baldwin the gun. On cross, they talk about some bullets. They talk about Hannah being the first time part-time armorer that he's worked with on set. He goes through some of the clips. He says it didn't seem like it was unsafe to him, even though, again, if anybody watches those clips of how they're holding the firearms, looks unsafe to me. He doesn't think Baldwin was rushing anybody. Again, kind of downplaying some of the defenses and some of the state's arguments, right? He was just kind of like, yeah, it was negligent. Wasn't that bad, though. She showed him the gun was empty before and after lunch, then handed the gun to Baldwin and leaves, but he didn't know she left. He just realized that after the shooting, she wasn't in there anymore. The lawyer tries to confront him, the defense lawyer, on cross, saying, you handed Baldwin the gun, didn't you? Even Baldwin says you handed him the gun. And he said, well, first he said Hannah handed him the gun, but then Baldwin did in fact change his story. So let's talk a little bit about, again, this defense that they've been developing, where if Hannah's not in the church, she no longer has the duty. It's David Hall's duty. And if she doesn't have that duty, she can't be negligent. That was developed a little bit on cross here. So we're going to hear some of that.
And you're thinking, talking to Mr. Baldwin, did you have any thought of that?
Honestly, no.
Okay. Yeah. Now, after you all talked, Mr. Baldwin, did you talk with him again after the shooting and after that day, the 21st?
No.
Okay. If at the moment that this had happened, I know you indicate that Ms. Gutierrez-Reed gave him the firearm, but if you had provided him the firearm, which you're denying, I know, you're saying that didn't happen. If that had happened and Ms. Gutierrez-Reed were not in the church at that moment, that would
If
have been
that
your
had
responsibility.
happened, because that's what everybody else says, and that's important. So he's going with this hypothetical, and she can object to speculation, but it's not really speculation. It's based on his experience and knowledge and what he knows. If the armor is gone, who does it fall to? So it's a good question setting up this argument for the defense, because that hypothetical, I think, is a fact that's pretty proven at this point, that David Halls was the one that handed Alec Baldwin the firearm. Vicky said, who put the bullets in the gun? Well, that was also a fact that I think's been proven. That was Hannah Gutierrez.
Under the safety bulletin to ensure the safe operation, right?
Can you state that again and
Yeah,
clarify?
that was pretty long. Under the safety bulletin, if the property master and armor are not present during a gun scene, and you were the person there, do you agree with me that the responsibility would then fall on the first assistant director in a general scene for safety?
I don't recall seeing any language about the assistant director taking responsibility for the firearm if there is a prop master or armor not present.
He's like, I don't remember that. I don't know that to be true.
Okay, sir, do you recall giving a deposition in this matter?
Yes.
Okay, and if I could just
Whenever they start with that, hopefully a lawyer's got the goods and we're going to see him impeached.
I get into that, I just want to kind of give you a few more details. See if you remember that under the safety advisory bulletin, that the first assistant director becomes the person responsible for maintaining and handling weapons if the property master and armor are not present. Do you recall that?
I don't recall that language.
Okay.
If you're saying it's there, and
Okay.
you can,
Well, do you recall being in this on page 121 at line 6? If you had known that Hannah, had you known that she
Improper impeachment, but no objection. So let's roll with it.
wasn't in the church, page 121 at line 6. If you had known that Hannah, had you known that she wasn't in the church, meaning Hannah, under this guideline, would you perhaps be the individual responsible for maintaining and handling weapons? And your answer: if I knew that she was to be leaving the church, yes, it would. And knowing that the gun was cold, as I believed it to be, as she believed it to be, as Mr. Baldwin was told it was to be, yes, I would be that person.
That's pretty good for the defense. That's pretty good for the defense that in his deposition, he said, if I knew she was gone and we all thought the gun was cold and Baldwin had it, then yes, I'd be responsible. That's taking some duty away from Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. Now, he does a pretty decent job, I think, on redirect talking about how, yeah, but it's her duty to let him know that she's leaving the church and she didn't do that. And that makes sense too, because it's like, how would he know he's doing her job if she didn't say, hey, I'm leaving? So you can't just absolve yourself of duty by disappearing, because you have a duty to inform the person who is going to be doing your job, meaning she would have to inform David Halls that she was leaving before he would take on that duty of gun safety. So I could see it going both ways, but I think it was pretty effective cross right there by the defense to get that out.
Worked in productions where an actor would have a gun. Do you remember that portion?
Yes.
Okay. And there's one more portion you gave just for completeness. And maybe the actor wasn't necessarily on set, and the prop master who was handling the guns, because there was no live fire. Again, it's a prop. So the prop master is responsible for these guns. He would often say, not often, but there have been a couple occasions where I have to go to my cart, get something. Can you watch the gun? And I would watch the gun. Do you recall giving that answer, sir?
I do.
Okay. And does that refresh your memory that if you know that they're not present, that sometimes you may be responsible?
If I knew that they were not present, yes, I would be, I guess, the next one in line to be responsible. Yeah.
Okay. And so
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. I mean, I definitely think if the jury wants to vote not guilty, they have some things they can hold on to. I personally think the state has probably proven the case up to this point, depending on what the defense presents. Like, that's where I would be leaning myself. But I mean, this set was a catastrophe and Hannah Gutierrez-Reed was absolutely negligent. But will the jury find that there's enough holes or enough reasonable doubt or enough setting up for failure, or even that her duty was removed and the duty was on David Halls, who, again, the defense can use the fact that he's already admitted he committed a crime because he's the one that committed the crime, not Hannah Gutierrez. So that's an argument they can make as well. He confirmed that Baldwin didn't check the gun, that Zachary said some of them don't shake afterwards when they were, looking at the ammo. And then at the end of cross, the defense goes through the fact that he pled to a misdemeanor, and this is basically a slap on the wrist. He wants to show the jury how little of a punishment this is, unsupervised probation, et cetera, et cetera. And my guess is he's going to compare and contrast that in closing argument with what Hannah Gutierrez has been charged with. That's my guess of why he went into that. The state eventually objected, and that was sustained, so they didn't get into it much more. On redirect, he confirms that Baldwin said Hannah gave him the gun, but months later he changed it. And again, that he's only responsible if Hannah tells him she's leaving. Then next, we have Sarah Zachary take the stand. And from the jump of her testimony, I was thinking to myself, none of these people on set are overly impressive to me, or not many of these people, I should say, are overly impressive to me that are handling the firearms and stuff. And it's like, I do look at the people that were the decision makers and the civil side of this, suing a production company and all the people making the hiring decisions and paying decisions. It's like, how did we end up here? She is also not in the film industry anymore. She also doesn't have a ton of experience. She also got the job because of Seth Kenney, who recommended her. I mean, that dude, don't take his recommendations, right? He recommended Hannah Gutierrez and Sarah Zachary. Hannah gave her a few minutes of training on how to assist the armorer because they didn't have an assistant for that day or for enough days. One accidental discharge was in fact her fault. And Zachary emailed all of her supervisors after that happened. She confirmed that she is not Hannah's boss. And she starts talking about where the ammo came from, especially the Colt long box, whatever, 45 long Colt dummies came from. We're going to listen to a little bit of that.
Seth Kenney and another vendor named Billy Ray had provided a few boxes of dummy rounds.
Were those dummy rounds 45 long Colt?
No.
So at the beginning of the movie, had Seth Kenney provided any 45 long Colt dummies?
No.
At some point during filming,
which is why Hannah Gutierrez had to bring it. And that's the ammo that ended up having the live ammo mixed in, which is why circumstantially the state is proving that Hannah Gutierrez brought the live ammo on set.
Mr. Kenney provide 45 long Colt dummies?
Yes.
And How were those provided?
Hannah had requested for 45 long Colts, and on one of our weekends, around October 12th, I went and picked them up from Albuquerque on one of her days off.
So you picked up the first box of 45 long Colt dummies from Mr. Kinney on October 12th.
Correct.
Was that the only box of 45 long Colt dummies that Mr. Kinney ever provided?
Correct.
And
When
Hannah Gutierrez in her interview said they went through those pretty fast, even when she was talking about the ones that she brought. So I don't think one box was going to be enough.
Ms. Gutierrez brought the gun belts and they already had the dummy rounds in them, if you recall, did she also have boxes of dummy rounds?
I don't remember what she provided.
Okay. You just don't recall.
I just don't remember. No.
Okay. Was there an issue with the 45 long Colt dummies? Were you struggling? Did you guys not have enough?
As far as I was concerned, Hannah just had requested them. I felt like we had plenty to work with, but she said that they just didn't, the ones that we did have just didn't fit quite as right.
Okay. In terms of the dummy rounds, during the time that you were working on Rust, who was the person in the position to make a decision about whether or not to use dummies?
Hannah.
Was there ever a time that you heard anyone else, a crew member or a cast member, request that dummies be put in a gun?
No.
During the time that you were working with Ms. Gutierrez on Rust,
It's almost like, Hannah Gutierrez is the only one that even wanted the dummy rounds to be put in this gun. Nobody requested it. So why did she even do it? Again, amplifying her negligence, even if she didn't hand Baldwin the gun. If Hannah Gutierrez is not guilty because Hall is, shouldn't Alec be not guilty as well? Well, so Hall admits to being not guilty for negligently checking the gun or not checking the gun correctly. Baldwin, I think, is going to be a pretty different argument because he violated every kind of gun safety rule by pointing it. You're supposed to treat every gun like it's live. He didn't check it. So there's a lot more things going on with Baldwin than Gutierrez and Hall.
Approximately how many times that you're aware of were guns dummied up, were dummies put in guns?
I don't recall. A handful of times, maybe.
A handful of times.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you participate? Were you handling the dummies?
Yes.
And why were you handling the dummies?
It was usually if there were 2 or more guns on set to move things along, because I was also acting as an assistant for her when it came to the weapons.
Okay. So you're the prop master. Technically, she's kind of under you, but you were also sort of her assistant.
Correct.
Okay. So with regard to your handling of dummy rounds on set, where were they? How would you get them? Did you get them from Ms. Gutierrez or did you have access to them?
I had access to them.
And where were they located?
Originally on the prop truck, and then as far as I know, we brought them on the cart when we needed them.
Okay. When you loaded a gun with dummies, what did you do to make sure that the rounds were dummy rounds and not live rounds?
Rattle them.
Did all of the dummy rounds that you handled, did they all rattle?
Yes.
Were there any dummy rounds on set that had holes in them?
Yes.
And did you ever handle any of those?
No.
Did you ever see Ms. Gutierrez load dummy rounds into any of the revolvers?
I wasn't paying attention to her loading them.
You weren't paying attention.
No.
Well, let me ask you this. Did you load the revolvers with all the dummy rounds, or was that something she did also?
She did them as well.
Okay.
She continues to explain that she never loaded the rifle as well. Alec Baldwin always requested Hannah, and that she did bring some dummy rounds from this Billy Ray character, but they were not 45 long Colts. And then we kind of are going to jump ahead a little bit to her describing the actual incident where everybody was standing from her perspective.
It was outside of the church, several yards away.
Okay. So after you put the dummies in the gun, and I'm sorry, did Ms. Gutierrez walk away from the cart with Mr. Baldwin's gun?
Yes.
And who put the dummies in Mr. Baldwin's gun?
Hannah.
Did you happen to see or take note of where she took the dummies from to put in the gun?
She said she was going to check it with Dave, so I assumed the church.
No, I mean, when she put the dummies in, did you see her?
No.
Okay, you don't know where she got those dummy rounds from?
No.
So then she says she's going to go in the church and check it with Dave. Is that right?
Yes.
And do you see Ms. Gutierrez again?
No.
When is the next time that you see her?
After the incident.
So the 2 revolvers that you loaded with dummies, Mr. Ackles' gun and the other gentleman, what happened to those revolvers?
I believe I threw them away.
No. What happened to
sorry.
the revolvers?
The revolvers, we took them.
She like couldn't wait to tell and like admit that she threw them away. But that doesn't come until later. She was asking what actually happened with the guns, and she was like, well, we took them back and put them on the cart. I'm going to jump ahead a couple minutes so we can hear kind of the most shady part of her testimony, which would make me think, like these witnesses definitely have their warts, Halls and Zachary, because she loaded 2 revolvers as well. And what happened to those? Were those any live ammo? Was she negligent? Did she do anything wrong? Well, we may never know, because she, in fact, threw all of those bullets or that ammo away. She doesn't know why she threw it away. It definitely wasn't to hide evidence or anything like that.
It sound compared to you've heard blanks go off, right? Is that a yes?
Yes.
Um,
Went off, and then I had walked over to Jensen. He was looking in the church, and I could see Joel on the ground clutching his shoulder.
what happened after that?
Jensen told me to get the guns to safety.
And so, what guns did you take, and where did you take them?
I took Jensen and Swen's guns back to the cart.
To the prop cart that was located right there.
Correct.
And did you do anything with the guns when you got them to the prop cart?
I put them in their socks.
Did you take the dummies out at that point in time?
Yes.
Why did you remove the dummies from the guns right there at that point in time?
Because after they're not being in use, you completely empty them.
Now, dummies are props that are reusable, correct?
Correct.
So you removed the dummies from the guns, and what did you do with the dummy rounds after you removed them?
I believe I threw them away.
And why did you throw them away?
In a state of shock and panic, I think it was a reactive decision.
That's not why you threw them away. It was a react. She didn't ask what type of a decision it was.
And did you tell anyone that you threw those dummy rounds away?
No.
At some point in time, did you disclose that information to law enforcement?
Yes.
Okay. So when you're dealing with these other 2 revolvers and taking the dummy rounds,
I think we all know why she threw them away, right? I mean, not that hard to figure out. She also talks about how she called and texted Seth Kenny. She doesn't know why, but he's kind of her mentor. Kenny never told her to plant or destroy evidence. She left because the police basically said to leave, and she was having a panic attack, and people were trying to console her. And she didn't really think that Hannah had any issues with her double duty, basically splitting time, and never really complained about it to Sarah Zachary, which brings us to her cross-examination, which occurred today. So let me pull up today's feed here. And right off the bat, basically in cross-examination, he brings up her cooperation agreement. So the whole jury knows she is testifying here because it's the only way to keep her out of prison. That's what the defense wants to make you think. She probably could have played to something that didn't have prison time, but she is cooperating. Defense always wants to make it sound like they're lying to help the state. The state always wants to make it sound like all you have to do is tell the truth. And as long as you tell the truth, you're fine. But if you lie, then you could still get prosecuted. And the state made those points as well.
Ms. Zachary, in this case, you agreed to cooperate with the state. Is that true?
Yes.
And you agreed to come in and testify against Ms. Gutierrez-Reed. Is that correct?
Yes.
And as part of that, you entered into a cooperation agreement with the state. Is that right?
Yes.
And that cooperation agreement indicates that if you agree to testify and you have to provide truthful testimony, that you will not be prosecuted for any crime. Is that right?
Yes.
So as part of your being here, you have a complete immunity from being prosecuted, correct?
I guess.
Well,
Yes. Sorry.
it's okay. Is that better? Okay. Is that your understanding of the document, that you have that you're not going to be prosecuted, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you testified yesterday that you had, as far as the props roles, you were Hannah's boss in that role. Is that right?
I wouldn't say boss, I guess a supervisor. What I said goes with props.
And Hannah was a props assistant, correct?
Part-time.
Yeah. And she was also.
So they talk about the immunity right off the jump. Again, the defense has done a good job with a lot of these witnesses, because I remember saying it, I think, on the very first witness, of showing a little bit of bias or a little bit of reason why maybe not everything they're saying is, maybe there is some shade to it, or they are trying to, make Hannah the scapegoat so none of them get in trouble, which goes right in line with their theme. Again, I think the state's probably done enough to prove it to me, but maybe this jury is going to see it a different way. Brooklyn Basement asks, is it typical for a private attorney to prosecute? No, it's atypical. That's why they call it a special prosecutor, and it only happens a select amount of times. Tina asks if I like this prosecution style. I do not prefer this style. Vicky, prediction, lots of movie industry retirements. Well, maybe some are necessary. Mara, I think the issue of the paramedics and the hospital incorrectly intubating her is a huge issue for later. She might have been saved. Big MedMal, your thoughts? Yeah, I did see some of that. I'm sure MedMal lawsuits have been filed. It doesn't really affect this case, though. I mean, I guess if they could prove that was the cause of the death and not this, but I haven't really heard any medical testimony about that yet. Maybe the defense will bring that in. I'm not really sure. Carter, thanks for gifting 5 memberships. Azam, thanks for gifting that membership earlier as well. I saw it come across the screen. They talk about firearms again, how she's clearly no expert. She's Seth Kenny's protege, basically. She was working under his license. He was mortified after the shooting. She quibbled a little bit about whether or not she knew. She wanted people to know that she threw the rounds away. She said she wasn't intending to get rid of any evidence. Okay. She brought Hannah her bag because she was instructed to. Baldwin was having a difficult time recalling things, but does believe that Dave handed him the gun. Then there was a little back and forth about whether or not she wanted to fire Hannah Gutierrez. That was kind of interesting. Let's see if we can jump to that.
To fire her? Your answer is yes.
Anything.
Ultimately, you did retrieve your property?
Correct.
Okay. At one point, there was a negligent discharge on set we've heard about, and that involved you handling a firearm. Is that right?
Yes.
And again, you were trying to let the hammer down. You had your finger on the trigger, and then it went off. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that was with one of the revolvers?
Correct.
After that, didn't you have a disagreement with Ms. Gutierrez-Reed?
A small one, yes.
Did you thereafter have discussions with people about wanting to fire Hannah?
I didn't want to fire her. I had my disagreements with her, but I never actually fired her.
Okay, you said
Said I never wanted to fire her. It's a pretty like solid answer. She didn't leave a lot of wiggle room there. She creates some wiggle room later, but let's hear her get impeached first.
you didn't want to fire her.
No.
Do you recall being interviewed on November 2nd, 2023 in this case?
Yes.
And you were asked the question, okay, did you want to fire her? Your answer is yes. And that's on page 19, 2 to 3. Did you want to fire her? You said yes.
Okay.
Do you recall saying that?
I do.
Okay, so
If you recall saying that, why did you just say no? I also don't understand, like, I guess she doesn't want to seem biased, but if she did want to fire Hannah and she thought Hannah wasn't doing a good job for the discharge or anything else, why not just say, yes, I wanted to fire her? I don't get that. You lose credibility like that. You got to realize the jurors have no clue who you are. So if they hear you lying weirdly about stuff like that and then immediately admitting that you were lying, doesn't sound very good. Now, she wiggles a little bit here, so we'll play that, and then we'll move on to the next point.
is it true then that you wanted to fire her?
From props, yes.
Okay, but a second ago you
From
said you
props.
did not make that statement. But
Yes, I want to fire her from props, not as the armor.
okay, so the reality is that you had wanted to fire her.
From props.
Yes, and other people had wanted to fire her as well, right?
From Seth, or
Just in general.
I believe Seth wanted me to do something about it. Yes.
And I think what you just stated is you did not do anything ultimately.
I did not know.
All right. So she also admits that she had a bad memory of the event. But now we're going to jump to basically the end of cross. And I couldn't believe that this is how this attorney wanted to end cross-examination. I couldn't believe it. I'll just play it and then we'll talk about it after. Usually you want to end cross on a high point, high note with a good punch. And I get that he's trying to prove this witness is biased against Hannah Gutierrez, but this is not how I would have ended cross.
Angry at Ms. Gutierrez-Reed days, right?
Yes.
Do you recall being angry at Ms. Gutierrez-Reed at one point on or about October 29th, 2021? You said, I hope she's put in jail. This is outrageous.
I don't remember the specific text message. I'd have to look at it.
If I showed it,
So this is the testimony he wants to get out. She's so outraged. It's outrageous on October 29th, so like a week after the shooting, and thinks that she should be put in jail. Thinks that Hannah Gutierrez, basically from day one, should be put in jail because her conduct is outrageous. Why would you want that coming into evidence? If the state didn't ask about it, why would you want that coming into evidence, that testimony for the jury to consider that somebody that was there, intimately involved, thinks that what Hannah Gutierrez did was outrageous and she should be thrown in jail?
See, would it refresh your memory?
Possibly.
I think, no.
Yes.
Now that you've had a chance to read it, does that remind you whether you said that?
Yes.
So you agree that she said, I hope she's put in jail. This is outrageous.
Yes.
Thank you.
And he repeats it for the jury once again. Thank you, Your Honor. I have nothing further. But then he goes and talks to his co-counsel and he has a couple more questions about what Kenny did. Seth Kenny tell you to keep your mouth shut? And she said no. On redirect, the prosecutor then, if this wasn't weird enough, the way that he ended across like this, decides to get up and say, Hannah called you the C word, right? And it was like a shock to your system to hear that thrown out in court. And she's like, yes, she did. Is that why you want to fire her? And she's like, no, not really. And then as if once wasn't enough, the prosecutor goes, well, what was problematic besides Hannah, besides the fact that she called you the C word? So she dropped it twice on this witness, which again is like cringe. I don't know how the jury's feeling. If the jury really doesn't like Hannah Gutierrez at this point, maybe they were like, yeah, she's really bad. But if any of them were like, this prosecutor style is a little brash. She also talked about how Hannah was immediately, before the medics even got there, immediately worried that this would ruin her career, which I do think is something that's kind of been in the back of my head the whole time. To hear a witness testify to it, not a good look for Hannah Gutierrez to be thinking about her career when somebody's literally dying and another person has a bullet lodged in their shoulder. She said her and Baldwin only talked about the fact that they couldn't figure out how a live round ended up on set. Then Joel Souza testified, and he talked about why they picked Helena. I thought it was nice, kind of went through her background, just in case you're wondering what he looked like. This is what he looked like. We're not going to play much of his because I didn't think a ton happened from him, but I think it was smart of the state to call him because the jury's going to want to hear from him. And from his perspective, he didn't think it was unsafe. Again, I thought that was pretty good for the defense. He was fine with everybody. I think he complimented Hannah, or somebody else complimented Hannah Gutierrez at different points. He talks a lot about how the scenes are set up, why scenes are filmed a certain way, where he was in the church, standing behind Helena. He didn't know that Hannah wasn't in the church, but he would have expected the armor to be in church. It's the armor to be in church. The armor to be in the church at that time and on every scene where there are firearms on the scene. And he made that pretty clear that that would be his expectation. Yes, he was shot too, Azam. Francis said, Peter, the prosecution is going to use a really nasty word soon. Yes, she did. Sharkin, hi chat, if there was no armor in the room, why did a gun get picked up by anyone and fired by anyone? I still think it's Alex's fault. So again, or you can still place some of that blame on the armor for not being there because it was her duty to be there. So it could still be everybody's culpable because everybody screwed up, but I'm not sure this absolves Hannah Gutierrez. It's an argument for the defense for sure. Azam, yeah, Peter, is it common for an attorney to say, if you don't give truthful testimony, I can prosecute you if I want to? Sounds like a threat. So this is only with the non-prosecution agreement. So Sarah Zachary, there was an agreement between she and the prosecution that if she came and testified and didn't plead the fifth, they would not prosecute her, even if she said something that would be incriminating, like, yes, I screwed up, or yes, I threw evidence away and I threw the ammunition away, even though I probably shouldn't have. All right, let's see what else Joel Souza has to say. He talks a little bit about the last moments with Helena, how he has to go to the same hospital as her, but couldn't. He doesn't know the rules on if the armor is not there, that it falls on the AD and cross that came out. Really not much, not a ton out of Mr. Souza. Then they talk about a guy, it was kind of a weird witness, but he was the front desk person at the inn in Santa Fe where Hannah stayed. They became friends. He was in her hotel room multiple times. Very strange. But he saw boxes of ammo basically just laying around her room. And then I didn't see much of the Wrangler and stuntman guy. He did say he saw guns and ammo left unattended periodically while on set. So I guess we can probably jump to the end of his testimony and just see if he had anything else to say.
Mr. Mortensen, let's proceed. Did you notice anything that caught your eye about the way that Ms. Gutierrez would conduct the barrel checks?
Yes.
Okay, and what did you notice specifically?
Can you describe specifically?
Well, let me do this. Do you recall discussing this during the interview that we did with you over Zoom?
I believe so. Yes.
Do you recall exactly what you said to us that day?
I think so. Yeah.
Do you need it? Do you need to see it to have your memory refreshed at all?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Moments on the set, and one that I can truly recollect was she took the gun from Alec and to check to see if the gun was clean, which there's a process that armors do. And
Can you tell the jury in your experience what that process is?
yeah, in my experience, you always make sure you check if a gun is clean or how many rounds are inside the gun. But what you can do is you open the cylinder, and this is speaking with single action pistols, and you take the cylinder out. And because blanks have a lot of debris that comes out with the gunpowder, you check the barrel sometimes to just see if anything is lodged in there, because that can shoot out with the gunpowder. And you open the cylinder and you can look down the barrel, and if this
I don't get why like everybody gets to explain what an armorer does. It's kind of crazy.
was closed.
And so in your experience, when she looks and the cylinder is closed, what would she be able to see?
Nothing.
I'll pass the witness.
So we'll hear if they get anything on cross. Ammo in her room could have been her personal ammo. That's true. It could have, but again, they're proving that she just kind of had ammo all over the place, and her negligent kind of mixing of everything, it just kind of goes in line with that. Joanne, lawyer, what do you think about the leading? It is frustrating. I wish he would object more. He's making her job too easy. She's literally putting words in the witness's mouth, and sometimes the witness isn't even agreeing with it, but she's able to get it out in front of the jury in a way you're not supposed to be able to do on direct examination.
Isn't it true that you can see light through that barrel just by pulling back the hammer?
Not that I know of.
Not that you know of. You're not an armor, are you?
No, ma'am.
You've never worked as an armor on any movie, have you?
No, ma'am.
In fact, in the filming of Rust, you were a wrangler, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Your responsibility is animals, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Horses,
Yes, ma'am.
donkeys.
No.
You weren't responsible for the donkey? I thought we heard testimony about a donkey. That wasn't you, right?
Not that I can recollect.
Okay. And in fact, during the Rust filming, isn't it true that you didn't even wear a real firearm? You had a replica rubber gun, right?
Not that I can recollect.
You don't recollect if you were a rubber, if you
He doesn't
had a
remember
real
like,
firearm
one
on
thing
us?
he
Is that what you're
did.
saying?
I can't remember if I had even a gun belt on.
Okay. At any time when you would have a gun on Rust, wasn't it a rubber one?
Not that I can recollect.
So you don't remember if you had a real gun or a rubber gun on this movie set. Is that what you're saying? It?
I can remember.
I don't know why she acts like she's scoring a lot of points with this guy. It's like, this guy is a nothing burger. Like, he's just another guy to say, yeah, stuff was loose, ammo was out, whatever, guns left unattended on set. That's it. I would not highlight this guy. I would just move on.
both a live gun and a rubber gun. But
On the filming of Rust.
yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, in your direct testimony, one of the things I thought I wrote down that I heard you say was there is nothing directly about Ms. Gutierrez's work on that set that caused you concern. Do you remember telling the jury that in direct?
Yes.
Okay. And when you saw these guns on top of that cart,
We just sat down after that.
You weren't right over the prop cart, right? You were further away from that.
Beside it.
Were you even able to tell if these were non-functioning or functioning firearms?
Not that I could tell.
Okay, so
Not his job.
in your
If anything, I think this highlights the fact that that's not this guy's job. That's Hannah Gutierrez's job. And clearly, based on the results, she failed.
have you ever seen on any of the movies you've worked on a part-time armor?
Never.
And in this filming on Rust, was there a time when horses ever got loose?
Yes.
And would you agree with me that that was an extremely dangerous situation?
I'll object to. Oh, I'm sorry.
So horses, it is a dangerous thing to have horses on set, right?
Yes.
And you were the one responsible for wrangling those, right?
Yes.
Do you recall a time on Rust when you had a problem getting paid on time?
Can we approach?
Mortensen, I'll re-ask the question here. So do you ever recall a time on Rust when you had a problem getting paid on time?
I I can't truly recollect.
What does that
Would it
mean?
refresh your memory to take a look at your pre-trial?
So producers sucked at paying too.
Mr. Mortensen, have you ever testified in court before?
No, ma'am.
I want to be clear. Did you see guns left unattended on the prop cart after shooting scenes that involved the firing of blank ammunition?
Yes.
Thank you. I don't have anything further.
All right. And then we went to lunch, right? Yeah. Okay. Very good. So we're all caught up for today. And again, 45, 50 minutes. I love when we can just break it down and give a recap. Obviously, we don't hit every single word that was said. Lots of channels doing that. I know, God, you guys said you came in today from those other channels, which is always good for the lunch break. Steph said 0 accountability, no checks and balances, 100% preventable. I agree with you. I mean, I do think the state has, it's kind of an easy job to make this seem like incredibly chaotic and negligent, basically everybody. But are there too many other people the jury can think they're the ones, their negligence caused it, not Hannah Gutierrez? That's what we'll have to wait and see. SC said, Peter, great live. I might write a book about my experience watching your lives. I'm not so sure how that book would do. Sorry, there was a fly. Vicky, did you bring your own horses to the set? Yeah. And did they hurt anybody? No. Okay. Did you leave them unattended? DSN, thanks for gifting a Lawyer You Know membership. Yeah, my guess is, right, and this is part of the defense's theories, is a lot of sets are probably sloppy, a lot of negligent things going on movie sets all the time, but guess what? Nobody goes to jail unless something bad happens. And that's the point. And that's why civil lawsuits and criminal charges have to be filed, because that's the way you create change. That's how cars get seatbelts. That's how we get warning labels on foods and medication and things like that. That's what can be very annoying and frustrating, but what helps the world be a safer place. And hopefully that's something that's happening after this catastrophe. Azam said, SC, do it. I'll buy your book. Sold 1 copy. Congratulations. Shani D, yes, lots of blame to go around. But yeah, I really think that this is a tough watch. It seemed to be a very tough scene. And we'll continue to watch, but I think they have presented. I wonder when the state's going to rest, because I feel like they've presented most of what I feel like I would need if I was a juror. What do you guys think? What else would you still need in this case for a conviction? Let me know in the chat. Alicia, love these recaps. Super efficient. Thank you. Thank you, Alicia. Thanks to the lunch summaries. Yep. It was different. Never done it before like this on a trial. Usually we do nights, but this was cool for this one. Worked out timing wise, but yeah. Let me know what else you'd need in the chat. Pretty soon here, we will be doing some votes on where we think we'd vote at this point, but we're not going to do it yet. But what you can click instead of a vote is the like button. Hit that like button on the way out. Make sure you subscribe. I appreciate you guys so much for joining me as always. Until next time, I'm out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.